Just having a quick read of today's Irish Times, because sometimes, it's like you have to just take a look at what the enemy is saying. Just taking a quick look at today's Irish Times and previous issues over the past, say, 3 or 4 weeks in particular, they have now gone the full tilt Jonestown in the Irish Times. I think we need to preserve these in print form for students of mass hysteria and brainwashing in years to come. It is like reading a protracted suicide note in the Irish Times. It is, and I mean, I'm 47 now, and I remember when the Irish Times was both balanced and reliable and fair, and also when the Irish Times embraced diversity in the very best sense, not the Eben Joseph or Deirdre Mortell sense, but in the sense of giving a voice to people who otherwise would not have been heard. The Irish Times for decades was one of the best English language papers in the world, and it was working from a very small base, and it was working from not a budget comparable to similar newspapers in the UK or the US. Yet it could absolutely stand shoulder to shoulder with anything from the English-speaking world. To that extent, possibly it's the same if you compare it to things like The Guardian or the New York Times or those kind of newspapers. And that's only testimony to how far they've deteriorated. But it's very depressing, I suppose, for some people to read the Irish Times. But this is all part of a broader trajectory that's happening anyway. And it was coming for a long time. Wokeness is only a part of it. COVID-19 is only a part of it. Wokeness comes from this pathological altruism. A lot of people encounter it. Thomas Sheridan talks about the typical Irish lower to middle class man who embraces mediocrity and is imbued in cowardice. And that's true. One of the things that they imbue kids with in those private boys' secondary schools, those rugby schools in Dublin, is this nonsense of social justice. And what that actually is the modern equivalent of original sin. So in the old days, in Irish schools, original sin was a big concept, and that was a great way of breaking down people's resolve and getting rid of their pagan spirit. Now the way they do that is they take kids on exchange trips to places like the ass end of Eritrea, or, Nicaragua or places like that. And one particular school ended up with some of the boys going off having unprotected sex with prostitutes. And that was the price of them going on these school trips to third world shitholes. That was the price of them. To say I've no sympathy is an understatement. But Ireland is a small country, and the notion that taking all of us on a guilt trip is going to change the world is quite simply a lie. It has to be a deliberate lie. And you still see that has now mutated. The latest manifestation of that original sin is wokeness. The notion that we need to open our country to criminals from Africa. The notion that we have to accept barbaric practices of peaceful religions, that kind of thing. Because otherwise, we're affronting the principle of diversity being our strength. Roderick O'Gorman, that utter disgrace who is in the questionable role of Minister for Children. I don't know why we need to have a Minister for Children. I don't know what they're supposed to do. O'Gorman puts up these tweets. We all know Ireland could be doing more for refugees. No, we don't. Please don't gaslight us or put words in our mouth. But that's exactly what happened in secondary school. We all know that we have a great big social duty. No, we don't. No, we don't. We live in a country which is run by the government anyway. The government control every aspect of our life. Let them look after these kind of things. Why is it my problem? But anyway, I've digressed slightly, and I was just looking at today's Business Post. Now, the Business Post, that's published in hard copy on a Sunday, but they have updates all through the week. It's not a bad old newspaper. Neither is the Financial Times, the one on pink. The reason why is because money talks. And they are making publications for very, very rich people. The inner party, if you like. They're not going to listen to woke bullshit. They want to see what's happening to their money. And what's in a headline I received in the Business Post today states now that it looks like the government is moving against the publicans in the event of the publicans attempting to litigate for the devastation done to their business, as well as the hoteliers. This devastation done to both of their businesses and restaurants. Restaurants, cafes, hotels and pubs. I remember talking in March of this year, when the first lockdown was starting, talking to anybody who'd listened to me, and I said to them all back then, close your doors. Close for good. Oh, but, 3 weeks to flatten the curve. No, it's not. You're a sucker. If you think that, you're a sucker. And one of the features of collective psychopathology is that they abuse the people who are most loyal to them. I experienced that in my mid-20s, and I learned a very, very salutary lesson from being loyal to an entity which then abused me. And I turned on them very quickly for that. Though I was only about 25, I was aware that this situation was not right. And as Simon Cowell says, you must trust your instincts. I trusted my instincts in that case when I was 25. I wasn't wrong. Never give a sucker an even break. And the publicans are represented primarily in Ireland by the Licensed Vintners Federation, the LVF. That is, until very recently, an establishment lobby group for the vested interests of people who run pubs, including hotel pubs. So they all operated along the assumption that, well, our friends in Fine Gael, and particularly Fianna Fáil, won't throw us under the bus. Well, you stupid fuckers, what do you think has happened? What do you think has happened? So they threw you under the bus, you've lost your livelihood, you have property that nobody wants to buy, you've stock like chairs and tables and cups and pint glasses that nobody needs, toilet paper, all this kind of thing. You're not going to be reopening, because if you think this 6-week bullshit that they're coming out with up to Christmas that's going to be an end to it, then you deserve to live on the streets. But actually you deserve to live in the streets anyway for the way you've behaved since March. The Licensed Vintners Federation was primarily a lobby group for wealthy publicans. Until the 1980s in Ireland, if you had a pub licence, it was a licence to print money, and an awful lot of very unpleasant and unsavoury people managed, by whatever means, and I won't speculate, to get pub licences. They stood back and they ran horrible premises, particularly in remote, isolated areas where they were the only pub. I know a lot of publicans. I know publicans from the country, and they're first-rate people doing their best to run good premises. But I have come across publicans who are utter pieces of shite. They had too much sway in the Licensed Vintners Federation, the way these kind of people always do in these kind of organisations. And now everybody in the pub industry, the broader hospitality industry, is paying a very, 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 very high price. I got an email yesterday from a family hotel in Wexford that was established over 100 years. They're closing indefinitely. This is a hotel that's a very, very popular hotel for people from Dublin, particularly in the east coast of Ireland. They're closing indefinitely. This is a disaster, because that particular hotel, it's an excellent hotel, and the people who run it treat all of their customers like royalty. And it doesn't matter if you're a new customer, if you're going there 50 years, they treat everybody exactly the same. They have a lovely informal way with them. Great food, great surroundings, great service, great care for their customers. But at the same time, it has that real old Irish hotel vibe of complete informality and lack of stuffiness. That's the way an Irish hotel should be. These hotels with dress codes and horseshit, it's not the Irish way. Anybody who knows the old great southern hotels run by CIE, they were in their heyday really in the 70s and 80s. They were great places. They were just great places, the old great southerns. Brian Cowan got rid of them when he gave the role of Taoiseach to a woman with a mental age of 4. And, pardon my cruelty, Brian Cowan's Taoiseach was not exactly an oil painting. Proof that stupid, ugly women can rise to the top, so long as you're in the right Fianna Fáil family. Anyway, I digress. People who were not suckers would have seen what was coming. They would have seen what was coming. They would have closed their doors in March. And unlike a certain pair, they would have gone to the High Court the right way. Because the vintners do have legal connections, shall we say. They know it's not mendacious. They know the right solicitors. There's nothing untoward about knowing the right solicitors. That's a right. You're entitled to go to the best solicitor possible and get the best barrister possible. Nothing sinister about that. But they are so closely embedded over really the best part of 100 years into the establishment that they were lulled into this. Because they said to themselves, well, the politicians, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, all those ones, sure, they're among us, aren't they? We're among them. We're all cut from the same cloth, aren't we? Like the 81 golfers. They're all cut from the same cloth. The 81 golfers in the Station House Hotel in Clifton and Connemara. And I could have told them what was coming now. I could have told them that. In fact, I know I did. I know that because I remember conversations I had with publicans and restaurateurs in Howth. I remember it. I said to them, shut your doors now, lay off your staff and sell. Even if you go at a fire sale, you're killing your liability straight away. Cut your losses, get out. No. Sure, what do I know about fucking anything? What do I know about Dick? So here we are, and now it's the 22nd of October 2020, and there's going to be another 6-week lockdown as of today. And this is now this is a psychopathic trick they're doing here. If we're good little citizens, if we're compliant, if we continue not to criticise RTE for all of their lies, then they might have a think about allowing us to enjoy Christmas. That gets on to another thing. Many years ago, I watched an excellent documentary on Channel 4 called Benefits Street. And it is redolent of the old 1980s days of Channel 4 when, by parliamentary mandate, Channel 4 was indemnified against challenging the establishment. And in the 1980s, anybody who's old enough to remember that, those of us who haven't vanished down a memory hole, will remember that Channel 4 in the 80s, it really was diverse in the very best sense. It was bringing in gay people, it was bringing in disabled people, it was bringing in the proper way, it was bringing in ethnic minorities. It gave a voice to people who had, up to the 1980s, legitimately been excluded. It wasn't woke, but it was, wokeness is an establishment thing. Channel 4 was anti-establishment. But Benefit Street was very, very good. And it was set into, they did 2 series of it. Series 1 was in James Turner Street in Birmingham. And Series 2 was in the Tylery Estate, outside Stockton-on-Tees, which is near Middlesbrough in England. That's a very poor area. It's poorer really than anywhere in Ireland, or in the Republic of Ireland. There's a lot of poverty in Northern Ireland. But we don't understand here in the Republic of Ireland the despair and isolation of these provincial urban areas in parts of England. Not even places, bigger conurbations like Newcastle, which itself is a very isolated city, but smaller cities like Middlesbrough and the outerlying areas like Stockton-on-Tees. What was apparent about the video, about the 6-part series, Benefit Street, set in Stockton-on-Tees, it was very sad because there was one woman with a profoundly disabled son, and there was a scene in it in which she and her best friend who lived next door were singing to the boy. The boy was 14 or 15. And it moved a lot of people, and it moved me. And I will never, for the rest of my life, forget the dignity and solemn courage of these very, very brave women nursing a 14 or 15-year-old profoundly disabled son and singing to him. And I remember at the time on social media that it moved an awful lot of people. It made a very big impression. The woman's name is Julie Young. And her courage and her bravery and her strength has always stuck with me. But one of the problems with the people on that particular street in Stockton-on-Tees was Christmas. Because, in a paradoxical way, for those people, Christmas meant an awful lot more in terms of spending and in terms of being seen to celebrate than it does people who are richer. Because those people in Stockton-on-Tees don't have a pot to piss in. Absolutely, they don't have a pot to piss in. And they spend their entire lives being indebted, dealing with loan sharks, dealing with tick. They wouldn't in any way be in the league to have a credit card. No, none of that. And the real cruel irony for those people is that they end up paying exponentially more than even people with a credit card. And you pay on a credit card as well. But there was one very, very moving scene in which all the neighbours on the street arranged, because the Julie's son was very profoundly disabled, he liked sensory stimulation. He liked bright lights, he liked noise. And the neighbours, as a surprise to Julie, arranged for reindeer and a sleigh to come along and pick up Regan and bring him on a ride just around the estate. And Julie was terribly moved by it. And it was terribly moving. And it testifies to me to the kindness of these people and to what a good community they had, despite the crime and despite the drugs and despite the lack of education and the antisocial behaviour. It brought home to me the goodness of those people, and I was terribly, terribly impressed and moved by it. After the sleigh ride, the boy died about 2 weeks later, because he had a limited life expectancy anyway. And for his funeral, the local Hells Angels came by, and they deliberately revved their bikes at the church because they knew that Regan loved the sound of motorbikes and the stimulation of the noise of the power of the engines. And the local Hells Angels came along and made a huge noise at his funeral. And again, it brings home to me the inherent decency of these people who didn't have their brains turned to shite at university. I went to university I did 3 degrees in university. I'm surprised I'm still alive after it. But these people none of them would have gone to university, you know. They had a Labour MP who they didn't have a lot of time for. I think even, ironically, a Tory MP would have done better for them. But they were trapped by Christmas. And what we're seeing in Ireland now is that Christmas is once again being cynically deployed as a weapon against people. If you're a pagan, you don't do Christmas anyway. So this is the testimony to that. You know, don't do Christmas. Christmas is shit. Forget about Christmas. You know, forget about wasting your money on things that people don't really need. And I say that, but at the same time bringing the boy out in the sleigh the way they did and revving the motorbikes at the funeral. That's not a waste of time. That wasn't a waste of money. That was a really, really good gesture. Singing to the boy. The 2 women singing to the boy. That was the right kind of thing. And that's what we need. This is how people will stay together in the face of what we're up against. I'm an eternal optimist. My anger comes not from pessimism, but from optimism. There's a saying, Sally Brampton, who was the agony aunt in the Sunday Times, and a very, very nice woman, suffered from chronic long-term depression. She came out with a remark that always stuck with me. Depression is frozen anger. Well, my anger ain't frozen. And any optimist will say to you that it's anger and insanity that keeps driving us. Because if you wanted to listen to RTE or to all of those horrible people, they're not people, the gowls in the Irish Times and RTE, those talentless Oompa Loompas, who are so hilarious. They're hilarious in the Irish Times and on RTE. There's nothing strikes a chill into my heart more than when you see a press release, RTE's hilarious new sitcom. Personally, I found the closing scene of The Wicker Man funnier than any horseshit that RTE has ever come out with. And that's not even including Amy Huberman. There was more genuine comedy in the goddamn motherfucking Wicker Man than anything that RTE television has come out with. You might be surprised, at least until recently, at some of the stuff that came out in the radio centre. Because that was a different building in Montrose, different canteen. They had a small little coffee shop in the radio centre. Different producers, different team. I won't say too much, but I would not lump the radio centre automatically in with the television centre in RTE. The television centre is beyond rescue. John Williams is the head of news and current affairs. What more need be said? What more need be said? But it gets back to the basic message. The people who are making the decisions in Ireland are psychopaths, but more importantly, they're cretins. And they're cowards. So we need to be clever, we need to be non-psychopathic, and we need to be brave.